In 2006, we had our first baby, a girl we called Sophie. Before she was even born, we knew we were going to swaddle her, feed her organic food, and she'd never leave the house without unbrushed hair. The world was going to be a perfect place. We were going to plan out every single part of a perfect little life based on all the preconceived ideas that we had. And, even Dad was going to say an embarrassing speech at her 21st as I cry as she set off on a great adventure called life, filling it with memories, adventures, challenges, and achievements. But the world had a different plan for us, different challenges, different memories, and mind-blowing achievements. Sophie was going to start those a little earlier. Sophie had a stroke when she was 4 years old. It's both sudden and completely unexpected. Sophie stumbled from the toy room where she was playing with her 2-year-old brother Elliot and her younger cousins. She collapsed in my arms, threw up on me, and became non-verbal. She was unable to move the right side of her body. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn down the centre and one side simply didn't work anymore. Half of her cried, half of her body moved, but all of my body feared the worst. The next 2 hours involved an ambulance ride and the first of many MRI scans of her brain. It also involved a visit to a crying room. That's the meeting room where the doctors take you to give you the bad news. The one with the box of tissues permanently placed in the middle of the table because you are going to cry. Hours later, we were in the intensive care unit and the next 24 hours seemed never ending, with test after test after test. And the only indication of night or day was the shift change of the hospital staff. The next day, Sophie said her first word since the stroke, which of course was no. The day after, she smiled, and a few days after that, we started rehab. I say we because it really is a whole family experience. Yes, your child is going through rehab, but you're learning how to inspire a 4-year-old how to do it. A 4-year-old who was relatively independent 48 hours ago. A 4-year-old with a mind of her own, and a 4-year-old who would now have to become motivated enough to do repetitive, difficult, and often exhausting tasks, not once, but day after day, with no understanding of the consequence she'd face if she did not. The hardest challenge was getting her out of bed. You see, she was a 4-year-old fashionista, spending hours matching her tutu to her shoes and all the accessories that went with it. Now she was scared, naked, and wearing a diaper. No amount of chocolate was going to convince her to take her first steps in a rehabilitation. Mental health and recovery hit pause. Life had changed. But Sophie was alive, and the importance we'd once placed on that perfectly planned, perfectly structured life suddenly exposed as not being important at all. I realised that if we were lucky enough to take her home, I wouldn't care if she was covered head to toe in therapy glue and glitter, or if she'd not brushed her hair. All I wanted was for her to walk out of that hospital. Our sole aim now was to provide her with everything she would need to become whoever she wanted to be. The first challenge was to get her out of bed, dressed and ready for people to see her, while not in one of her carefully created outfits. When Sophie arrived at hospital, she was naked, covered only in a sheet. When she was eventually given pyjamas, they were sterile, both medically and aesthetically, with no element of colour to them at all. The hospital, like all hospitals, provided a stock standard basic hospital gown. They gave easy access to hospital staff by covering very little, and they had fastenings that opened easily, which meant they fell open often when they didn't need to. They left no one, especially the children wearing them, in any doubt that they were sick, frail, and essentially damaged in some way, not deserving of the bright, fun, and dynamic clothes they used to wear. But everyone deserves dignity, even that 4-year-old. So, the next change we made was to create those crazy, fun pyjamas, PJs as we like to call them, to get Sophie dressed and moving. At first I had modified her existing clothing so they would be accessible for medical requirements. Then when I realised that worked, I designed and created hospital PJs that actually look like cheerful outfits. These pyjamas needed to be practical, of course, to go around the wires and monitors, ensure accessibility, be imaging machine and procedure suitable. But they needed to do that without sacrificing the fun. Sophie's reaction to these pyjamas was instant. They motivated her imagination and back into a morning routine. The only difference now was instead of deciding which tutu went with which pair of sneakers, was now which PJs was she going to strut her stuff in that day. The vibrant colours and designs prompted doctors, nurses, families and friends to see something different when they entered the ward and saw Sophie. Prior to the PJ revolution, people would often look at Sophie's chart before they looked at her. And the comments they would say, "You poor love, how do you feel today?" Or, "Have you done a poo yet?" Seriously, that gets boring after the millionth time. But the second Sophie started sporting her PJs, their eyes would be drawn to her and they would say, "Wow, look at your amazing outfit." As a mum, I could see the impact that that change was having on her. As their words changed, as jovial smiles lit up their faces, she changed. She stood or sat a little taller. She smiled more. She talked more. The way she saw herself changed. In my mind, it was equivalent to the mental health boost that women with cancer have when they have access to quality wigs, beautiful scarves, or a makeover. As Sophie walked through the wards, parents would stop us to chat, all the while smiling at Sophie and her pyjamas. Over time, the fashionista Sophie returned, and those corridors turned into the 4-year-old's version of a catwalk strut. As more families saw the pyjamas, more families wanted them. It became clear to me that hospital PJs needed to become a thing. So, in those spare, rare minutes when I wasn't being a mum and full-time carer to Sophie, mother to my son Elliot, or wife to my husband Jamie, I quietly decided to start a company. The goal of the company seemed so simple to me. We would improve the mental well-being and dignity of children in hospital by addressing them in a way that respected their dignity, encouraged others to see them as children first, patients second, and to help them feel as happy, normal and childlike as possible. I suspected, based on my extensive research about the links between mental wellbeing and physical wellbeing, that the improvements in the mental wellbeing, which was our primary goal, would also have the potential benefits to the physical wellbeing of the child. A lot of people wanted me to crowdfund for this idea. That wasn't for me. I did not want to raise money by sharing Sophie's heart-wrenching story online. The entire project was about securing the dignity and privacy of the child, not by splashing the most heart-wrenching and torturous moments online. I needed to find another way to do this. That was one major problem. But let me tell you about another problem I was dealing with at the second time. Apparently, you can't just decide to become a person who makes pyjamas and gives them away for free. Well, you can, but there are some regulatory hurdles you do need to jump over. Important ones, because the clothes that we do put on these sick and injured children need to be safe. I never envisaged my life would be learning so much about the fire safety sleepwear standards of pyjamas. But as I was learning, life is going to be full of surprises. It took time, but we were able to secure ratings for 2 of our designs. Now time to get back to the problem of money. I set myself an audacious goal. With a fixed deadline, the new children's hospital was opening 12 months away. I decided that I would quietly and without online crowdfunding raise enough money to sponsor a set of pyjamas for every bed. That was 360 sets of pyjamas, which would mean I'd need to raise $10,000, give or take. I decided the solution to the funding issue was sponsorship. Walk into any hospital and you will see signs everywhere acknowledging the generous contributions of sponsors. This ward was sponsored by, this room was sponsored by, this piece of equipment was sponsored by. Why should hospital PJs be any different? Our product allows room for sponsorship logos to appear. So we embrace the sponsorship model that's already so deeply interwoven into the hospital-based giving programs. I got to work. I started introducing myself to Rotary groups. To do public speaking gigs and start raising that money, my very first meeting was with Brisbane Rotary Inner West. I thought before I got there, maybe they might sponsor 10 out of the 360 pairs of pyjamas. But when I looked around the room, I saw that I was the only woman in a room of 50 or so men, mostly who were older. There were no mums or new dads there that day. And I thought to myself, oh, this is not going to be of interest to them. I could not have been more wrong. After my 10-minute pitch, the questions came thick and fast. They asked, how many pyjamas do you need? I said, 360. They said, okay, and went about raising the money for them, every single pair. I guess what I hadn't counted on was the grandfather factor. Never underestimate a grandfather. They can be determined, skilled, and fiercely protective on the outside, but oh, they have such wonderfully gooey centres. They held one golf day and raised the entire $10,000 needed. A single event. Their generosity blew my mind. When the 360-bed children's hospital opened, there was a set of pyjamas on every single one. Importantly, these pyjamas became the property of the children. They're theirs to keep and use during their ongoing recovery. This is especially important for children with conditions like cancer who require multiple return visits back to the hospital. The only downside to that, we're going to need to make a lot more pyjamas. I get overwhelmed at times. My audacious goal is that there will be a set of pyjamas on every bed in every hospital in the world for children to love, use and take home. And that these will never cost the families a single cent. It's hard to have that kind of dream and find the time to feed it as well, especially while caring for your family and a child with ongoing medical needs. But Sophie has blossomed into a smart, kind, and caring 16-year-old. She requires less and less of my support as she becomes increasingly independent and a wonderful advocate for her own needs. Now I'm starting to devote more time to the project. Still get overwhelmed at times by the scale of the goal, the work to be done, and the support to be rallied. But during those times, I remember the impact we're making. I often get letters from around the world sharing with me the power of PJs. My favourite is from the beginning, right here at home in Brisbane. Sophie was in hospital at the time, and the social worker came up to me after the appointment and said, can I order a pair of pyjamas for a sick little boy in ICU? I said, okay. And she goes, his dad's not doing too well. You see, Dad had confided in the social worker that he felt useless to his 1-year-old son. It was Dad's routine that every night he would get home from work, dress his son in his pyjamas and read him the bedtime story. And that was not happening in the intensive care unit. There were no pyjamas. And it robbed this father and son of this daily tender bonding moment. That night, I raced home and made the cutest set of Dr. Seuss yellow pyjamas, suitable to go around all the wires and monitors. Just so cute. And the next day, I raced them back to the hospital. Straight up to the front desk, left them there, express post for this one. That afternoon, the dad got given the pyjamas. And that night, Dad did the bedtime routine. He dressed his son, he laid on the bed with him, and he read him his bedtime story. He was Dad again. Through all of the noise and trauma, he could help. And the book they read? The Cat in the Hat. Sophie often tells me stroke made her who she is today, strong and resilient. It had a huge impact on her life. It had a huge impact on mine too. As a mother, a carer, a health advocate, and quite unexpectedly as a person who wants to make pyjamas and give them to the world for free. I believe now is the time to share this idea with the world and pay it forward beyond my home city and show exactly how much impact one person and one pair of pyjamas can make. Thank you.